of the role of this, making fun of the scary things. Just now, especially if we're going to see the presentation again, please. Yep. So, and the other two images I would like, no, just go back. So the second image, it's called the DJs of Changes. There were people who were invited to the some sort of invented, just for completely made up agenda, just to draw attention from the meeting in support of Tikhanovskaya before the elections. And there were two guys who turned on basically the anthem of this year protests called Перемен by Victor Tsoi, the Soviet Russian singer, Soviet Russian Korean singer, let's say so, if you're going for ethnicities. And these guys, they were firstly detained and fined and of course fired from their jobs. Now they're in exile in Lithuania because they were persecuted. And that's all started even before the elections. So perhaps they ran away even before the elections happened. But this image is quite iconic because after they turned on this song, they were just standing like this, showing the support for the public. People went completely wild supporting them. All the fines they faced, basically because they're also been fired, not only fined. People collected during like 1 or 2 days around 30,000 euro for them. So because they lost their jobs. And also I would say that it's not like I would say, I have to say that all the fines the police gives to the people, it's sponsored. People don't pay them usually themselves, only when they feel that it's not a big financial burden for them, but mostly it's covered using the fundraising, like crowdfunding. So people donate money so other people can pay fines from the government. And so people wouldn't be that scared to suffer from this financial persecution. And the other one, we've seen these pictures from the Nadia Sayapina's performance at the Heritage in this gallery. And then after she was detained, and she wasn't detained for taking part in the protest, it's basically the first and I hope the last example of an artist being detained for their art. She'd been arrested from her home and she spent 15 days in prison. And it's not like you're just like sitting there. It's actually quite awful conditions. Even if they don't beat you, it's still not a nice journey. And basically she was punished because she'd done a lot of like this, the Heritage. She also took part in the Art of the Regime performance, so with the violent images and the traumatic images. And also she'd been doing a lot of visual works because she mostly works not only with performances but also with visual works. And that was a performance in the support of her and other cultural workers, which were detained. And people were basically repeating her thing, her performance with the Heritage, but doing it not in the gallery space, but in the random places in the city. With a sticker on there, you can see this Chaim Sutin's Yeva paintings on the wall. It's a sticker, and so were people standing with the portraits of the political prisoners, and mostly those who are cultural workers. But so it's not only about, of course, we have several more images like Nina Baginska, the 73 years old protester, and she's been doing protests since the end of the 80s. So she's like, she's called now the mother of the protest, but she'd been just, she had been doing it before it went mainstream, let's say so. And several other pictures, but basically I'm just talking about the importance of celebrating the input of people who are risking themselves to empower the protests. And next slide, please. I'm not going to talk a lot about, because you know, there is always a temptation, since there are a lot of female or women protests and women marches Saturday in Minsk. There is also And also, women won the presidential elections, and even people in the factories voted for women, for Svetlana Tikhanovskaya. And that's always a temptation, and I see a lot of this happening, to talk about this protest as from the gender point of view, that it's a female protest, that it's more about feminism. But I would say that it's more like sort of coincidence, because basically Svetlana Tikhanovskaya didn't even want to become a president. She registered herself as a candidate for the presidential elections only because her husband, who wanted to run this presidential campaign, was arrested, and he's still in prison. And so he's been arrested in the end of May, and he's still there. And basically now we have an elected president, a woman is an elected president just because her husband was detained. And also all these images of women in white, it started as a first as a political, just as a, they were not calling it a performance, but basically, so initially it was a performance that a group of girls, they suggested just to come dressed all white to the market, central market in Minsk. And the idea was, it was straight after all this violent, and so people were killed like the day before it. A lot of men were imprisoned, and it was sort of frustration and hopelessness. And the idea was, okay, perhaps since like this regime, the president, and also the police, they're quite sexist, and they don't consider women as like as a proper human, so they wouldn't beat us that hard at least. And perhaps we can at least like do this political statement. And actually, it's been working almost for months, and women protests, they were completely non-violent and no one was detained. But when September came, like wake me up when September ends, when August ended, people, women started to be detained and also beaten. So it was like, okay, perhaps it was the sort of an act of admitting the political power of women in this protest. And there were a lot of artistic expressions celebrating the role of women coming to protest. And since it started from these women in white performances, and in the first 2 weeks, I think people actually were dressing all white. And then when it became colder, it's quite hard it's very easy to go in the white dress, but when it's September and it's already cold in Minsk by that time, people started to wear all colors, but these women protests, they still continue. And the next slide, please. And basically, already to round up, I would like to talk about this importance of overcoming the fears. And mostly, for some reason, because perhaps this balaclava image is still quite violent, and it's like a person who can beat you, who can murder you, arrest you, whatever. And we have a special transport. We call it like a national public transport. It's actually, I've been told it's not there is no proper translation to English, because it's called автозак. In English, it would be like a paddy wagon, like a transport where prisoners are transported. But usually in democratic countries, you don't have so many prisoners at some or people who are detained at the same time. So it's basically a transport to transport arrested people from. And in Minsk now they're everywhere. And those artistic expressions, mostly from the illustrators, it's about rethinking like how to make them not scary, or how to show what's going to happen after the protest ends, after the revolution wins, how they're going to be reused after there. Because I really hope very soon we wouldn't need these hundreds of автозaks in the country, so we have to use them properly. And that became a joke. And also, I would say that this artistic response is sort of a reaction to the people used to be, before this summer, people used to be very afraid of being detained. And this autozak, it became sort of like an image of fear and hate. And this image have been used in the artistic critical art for quite some time already. So it's not like a new thing to draw it or to reconsider it. But before, it was much more about the fear. And I remember talking, I think it was on the 10th of August, I was talking with the former policeman, and he told that, like, we're going to win when people are not going to be scared of autozaks, when everyone is going to, okay, you want to detain me, whatever. And actually, that's what happened already, because if you see sometimes like the images from how people are being arrested, sometimes they're just going, okay, you want to arrest me, I'm going. Because people are quite ready for this. And this image is being reconsidered inside of people's heads, but also there is like visual layer to it, visual reaction in these illustrations of making it funny and not scary. Because a lot of traumatic things are happening, still happening, and people need this sort of laughter and sort of irony in, I would say, in art. And it's like, I don't know, people just enjoy seeing autozaks being used in a different way as presents, or it's also like you don't see it on the screen, but if you scroll a bit down, so we would see, it's basically, you see the one from the Lego bricks. It's actually an installation from the art group Kosmachna, which means fast and tasty. It's basically like almost, I think, real size autozak being put in the gallery space. And perhaps, I don't know actually, but since there are a lot of things happening, it also gave some sort of artistic freedom to the galleries, not only the artists who do their artworks and post them online, but also for the galleries to exhibit and expose some critical art, because perhaps this age of self-censorship in Belarusian cultural scene came to an end with this year and the protests. So now we're heading more for the rebirth, and but I think this rebirth is about to come at some point, and that's just another image. I would say it's a bit like naive and very sweet, so perhaps not that critical. It's more like what the general public loves, but it's like I've chosen it for the closing slide just because you have a lot of layers of tropes used, because you have like some sort of flowers growing from something in the lower part of the image, something which looks like barbed wire, which is also like very iconic for Minsk and other big cities in Belarus today, because everything's covered now in the barbed wire, everything they value, I mean the government. And this almost decayed autozak. And basically we talked about heroes, and the heroes as sitting on the roof. So this Nina Baginskaya, who is a 73 years old protester, Maria Kolesnikova, and the DJs of changes, and also a dog. And dog is one also like, it's joke because so I'm not going to explain it because it has to involve you, or maybe it's easy to explain about this joke about why we use the dog as one of the symbols of the revolution. The thing is, when the Russian propagandists came and started to work for the Lukashenko regime and how to like sort of counter-revolution movement, they started to have like rallies to support Lukashenko. And they were using that the people would stand there and yell like "Za Batku," which means like for the father, and it's his nickname. But when you hear the crowd yelling this, it's not a huge one, but like a small one. It sounds like "Za Batku," which is like, and he's asking like who we are going to feed, and they're like just randomly yelling this for the father, "Za Batku," which sounds like the dog. And like, we're going to feed the dog. And everyone was making a lot of fun of it, and also being ironic about these counter-revolution measures. And this sabachki, these doggies, became one of the like cute symbols of the Belarusian Revolution 2020. So yeah, I think we should move to the discussion part, because I think we have around 20 minutes since we started a bit later. Yep. I hope you have questions. And those links are, if you want to see more artworks or to read about Belarusian art scene, those are the links which have been used, especially the first to collect all the images. So you can find all the credits there and read more about the Belarusian cultural scene and art scene, sorry. Yep. So questions, please.
How come there's no platform for press about me?
Because we don't have them. Actually, talking now about the platforms, we have platforms for the voice. It's for counting the elections, and it was created before, and there is no sort of a platform for the revolution. And if you're talking about the platform for this year revolution, it's going to be Telegram. Because also we always have, they block the internet every Sunday, mobile internet, and people cannot, and for the first 3 days, it wasn't possible just to use any sort of internet connection. So, except of Telegram, because it can be hacked a bit.
It's not from. There is also a platform. I don't know if initiated. It's probably also somebody from Belarus. It's called protest.me, and it also collects any visuals related to protest and the situation in Belarus.
Thank you. Sorry, I misunderstood your question because I thought that you were talking about this. Yeah. Sorry.
And what I wanted to add is that some friends of mine also submitted work. It's like for free. And one of my friends' work is two hands hold together, red hands, got to appear
like this, right?
I'm not sure. I think only the hands. And got to appear on the funding links in Belarus, and no one knew the author, and that was funny that Moldovan illustrator did some stuff for the Belarusian protest, and that's really nice.
Actually, I haven't covered it, and thank you for bringing this up, because there are like, I think on Instagram it's called Artists with Belarus.
Yeah.
But I was trying, like, certainly for this presentation, I was trying to work on with the Belarusian generated images, let's say so, and to show how the Belarusian artists see the situation. And also, I've been showing this Women in White challenge, like Maxim. Can you show the 2 slides up, please? So it's the slide number 22. Yep. No. Upper. This one. With this, it's called like #Women in White challenge, and it's not only Belarusian artists who are doing it. It's like around, I think, already almost around 1,000 illustrations from people all around the world. Anyone can contribute to it, and the idea is to continue the roles or something. So yeah, it's very actually inspiring, and I'm always telling people from abroad that it's actually when you do a repost, or if you create a text, or if you do an artwork which supports Belarus, or these protests which are happening outside of Belarus. I know that it also happened in Chisinau, like near the Belarusian embassy, some sort of a rally, like perhaps not a huge one, but still. And all this actually happens a lot. It happens a lot, but also it supports the people inside the country, because they feel that they're not isolated. In the beginning, I was telling that the Belarusian artistic scene is quite isolated, and the artists, they're not involved in a lot of festivals and international projects happening in Europe, for example. But now it's sort of this boundary is being erased, because people from abroad and artists from abroad support Belarusian artists. And basically, you cannot now even distinguish if it's by a Belarusian artist or not, because some works are quite prominent. But I actually haven't included them on purpose today, just to keep it more narrow to like Belarusian art scene during the protest. But thank you for bringing this up, because it's very important for the whole picture.
And you mentioned our protest in front of the Belarusian embassy, and it's funny because some of us drew something with chalk on the asphalt, like on pavement, you know, and a lot of police came. So at a certain moment, there were more policemen than us, the protesters. They were like really annoyed. They didn't know how to talk with us because they were telling us, "You can't do that, you can't do this." But we were.
Was it like a Chisinau, like a urban police, or it was from the embassy?
No, police, the city police. Yeah, and then they wrote down all our names. So this happened just because it was in front of the embassy.
Yeah, that happens when you approach it.
Yeah, and then
Belarusian laws start to work.
the guy was called to the police, and he was fined. And actually, there was a court, and he lost it, and now he has a fine to pay because he and some other people there drew with chalk on the pavement, but he's going to appeal it, of course.
But why is it happening? First, I would like to say that if he has this problem, I think he can try to reach this by help thing, because they support with these fine things, and even if he's abroad, perhaps there's solidarity for showing the solidarity. They can help him to pay it off. I mean, I'm not their representative. But still, I mean, like, I don't understand why the Moldovians do it. I mean,
yeah, because our president was one of the few who congratulated Lukashenko with winning the elections. So that's why they're one for one, bravo for bravo.
Yeah, but I think after the inauguration, there is no unity among these bandits, because even Putin haven't congratulated him yet.
So it was just China and Chechnya.
Chechnya is not yet a country. I mean, they're not a separate one.
There is one question from the online.
Yep, sure. Maybe we can put something on the screen instead of this O. Maybe at least the beginning slide or something, no?
Do you think dehumanization of the other is a problematic thing?
Well, that's a very good question, because it's indeed a problematic question. Because when we talk about dehumanizing the cultural other, for example, the first example which would come to our heads would be perhaps the Holocaust and depicting Jewish people as threats, for example, and telling that they're not like proper people or something. And that's very, very unkind and actually like very, very disgusting practice. But also, I think when we're talking about the persecuted, but when we like switch it, and if we would say, okay, like it was unkind and not humane to depict the victim like this, but if we're talking about dehumanizing the Nazis, is it like really a bad thing? And then we have this sort of a dilemma, and there are people also who are like talking about that it's not time to actually punish people and to de-anonymize them and blame them for being part of the system, because there haven't been any court yet, no trials. So it's like that you're basically doing this lynch trial thing, and which is like not nice. But also, I would say that that's a sort of natural reaction of this sort of art therapy through creating artworks, and also seeing these artworks, seeing that it's not like just people who are just like us, but like it's a technique to manifest what we find decent, what we find humane, and what is completely unacceptable. And I would say that, of course, it's a problematic thing, but I don't see any scenario in which we can avoid this at this point of at this point of very rapid and very reactive artistic response. Because what I actually anticipate as a researcher, let's say so, that there is going to be a development also in the art field. Because what we're talking about in this evening is very fresh. It's not settled yet. It's not. We are trying to reconcile with what happened, but it's just like the first steps. We are still in this protest, and we're still in the process of understanding whose fault is it, and what we're going to do with the police workers, what we're going to do with the KGB, with the people just who work for the government and not involved directly in the police or military stuff. And that's quite challenging, and I'm actually anticipating there more considered and more like bigger artistic works which are going to be created after the protest and the revolution comes to an end. And it's very interesting how the society and the artistic community is going to talk about this dehumanization, the anonymization of the people who are in the system right now, and how we're going to do this. Because we haven't, like in Belarus, we haven't worked with this after the fall of the Soviet Union, because a lot of countries have done it like in the beginning of the 90s, what you do from with the people of the system. And we don't know, because like we skip this part because the Soviet legacy is pretty much integrated in the Belarusian official ideology. And so that's a huge question. And as for like personally, coming back to this dehumanization, as a person living in this violent and traumatic period, I don't see a problem with it, and I feel some sort of I don't know even how to call it. Maybe like reaffirmation that what we are doing is right, and what the others are doing, and like the right police is doing is a bad thing. So it's like more reaffirming that's what we're doing is kind, and what they're represented is evil. But when I'm looking at this as a researcher, I have like doubts about if it's actually ethical to represent them, if we are not going to this like to making their victims with our like artistic at this moment, artistic persecution or activist persecution of this dehumanizing people and finding their families and putting graffiti in the addresses to their houses, saying that the murderer lives there. So as a person living in the country right now, I mean in Belarus, I don't find it problematic, but as a researcher, I do find it very problematic. So perhaps so.
There is one more comment. Question, a compliment on the video presentation, but visual lift what you say. Thank you. And Anna also makes a precision. It was an American late time, so around 45 euros. So it's not quite symbolic.
Well, in Belarus, I mean, it's not like that's of course a sum of money, but in Belarus usually it's around 400 euro. Fines for taking, like for going out on the street is around 300, 400 euro fine usually per person. So yeah, that's pretty. But yeah, for doing the chalk, I think it's completely inappropriate. And today in the airport, I've been asked by the police, frontier police. They've been like, I don't know if it's connected to the COVID situation or because I felt like he was basically asking me like all the questions, like what I'm doing, what my presentation is about, like what exactly where I'm going to stage, what sort of institution, like looking at all the papers. And I was standing there and I was like, is it about COVID or it's about like me coming from Belarus to some artistic talk? And actually, I started to think like, what like Moldova is the official position of Moldova on this, and if they're like maybe it's like some sort of like agreement with the Belarusian government to check what people are coming like doing here, is like activists coming and all these things. And I felt very weird. In the end, it was all fine. It's okay, you are free to go. And I was like, yeah, but what was it about?
I also have a question. I would like to say, if Anna can hear us, that I didn't mean that this, the sum of money is symbolic as it's not much. It's symbolic because we can use it as a symbol, and we can show it as a symbol of fight outside Belarus. And my question would be, the Belarus protest stands out a lot. And it's always amazing. Every time I see something new, I can't believe that it's something so creative, because we're living in the era when we think that everything was already done, we've seen everything. But still, the protesters, the artists, the cultural actors are able to remodel the reality and transform it into these amazing images that we see in the Telegram channels and the news. This non-violent protest. And what do you think stands behind this, and what generates it? Because it's a very different protest from what we're used to, from the violent protest that we're used to in the northern eastern part of Europe. I know that it's a new trend, not trend, but a movement not to be violent, non-violent, to protest peacefully. But there is a special kind of kindness, as you said, in the Belarus protest and creativity.
Well, I am not sure what is the main ingredient for it, but I would say firstly it's the idea of people that they like, and why people being supporting the regime. It's because they didn't want like Maidan to happen, and people like the general public sincerely didn't want any sort of violent action to happen, and they were like making peace with what was happening in the country for all these years. And so the first thing is people actually don't want these violent things happening. And then this like the official current anthem starts with the line like "We're Belarusians, the peaceful people," and perhaps for people it's not just like a line in the anthem. It's more about like how actually they position themselves. And the second part is that the protesters haven't started the violence. It was the police and the army who started this after the elections. And that's a very, like, it's one of the most important messages people are trying to convey, is that we are not like them. It's unacceptable, it's inappropriate to beat someone, to kill something, to set something on fire. And it's basically like building this, like the otherness for the police and for those who support the regime, that it's completely unacceptable. And if we are talking about the unacceptable thing, that means that we have to be the example that things can be done without this. And if it's unacceptable to be done to us, we also cannot do this. And also another thing that if the protest and people are aware of it, if it goes violent from the side of the protesters, the police and the army, they wouldn't withhold themselves. So it's going to be some sort of like very violent or war-like actions on the city streets. And also, I would say that the media agenda and Telegram channels agenda, it's quite well coordinated and well thought. And the peaceful protests, they're much more effective than the violent ones, and more people join them, and the effectiveness is higher, like to 60% or something, than the violent protests. And people are aware of it. And also there is a demand from public, like, okay, we cannot be that peaceful. We have to do them. We have to punish them. And there is also a demand from people. I wouldn't say just like a segment of people. It's more like at some point you're super peaceful, at some point you want everyone to be punished or something. So it's like a sort of like, these sinusoid waves of how you feel about this peaceful nature of the process. So I would say that the main thing is like the three basically ideas around the peacefulness of the protest.
It might be a trivial one. I would like to ask you about the channel Nectar. And as I understand, they are having a bit of propaganda. I'm not sure if it's a healthy one for the protest, because sometimes it seems a bit aggressive or maybe hysterical.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think about this? Is this a trusty channel to watch? Maybe there's another which is more like conscious and peaceful and stuff like this.
Well, I would say that I'm not sure if you're still following it. I mean, like on their daily basis, because in the beginning I had a problem also with them, because especially when there was like all these violent actions and they've been posting something like, "Oh, the riot police is beating up people. We need more people there to beat the riot police come," or something like this, and that was quite tricky. And also, it was at the time when most of the people didn't have internet connection. But then they basically sort of balanced it, and I wouldn't say like living inside of the city. I wouldn't say that they're usually posting, that it's very much different from what's actually happening or from the ideas or views of the general public, those who are against the regime, and basically most of the people now. But if you would like make some sort of an example, maybe perhaps, because I cannot recall something from the recent days, something being very like provocative or propagandist.
Okay, I started watching it in the beginning of this, and it was really hard to watch some pictures, and because it's really, like,
That's
if
right.
I read and see, it's really dramatic. But I was watching later the show with the guy from Nectar, and I really recall maybe some earlier posts, and that gave me also the idea that like to not have the same instruments as the regime has. Like you have to be really careful, and the same with dehumanization is also a war instrument. It's easier to kill somebody when you don't think it's a human. So you have to be like really careful with the terms. Well, yeah, maybe public shaming is also a good punishment in this case, but it's important to not go into killings, from the other side. So really careful with the propaganda and stuff.
Yep. Well, yeah, but also I would say that the good thing, not everyone, but since there are like a lot of people involved in the protest movement, there is no like coherent propaganda wave like that. Everyone reads Nectar and everyone does what Nectar says. Everyone's like, yeah, you're like based in Poland, and it's very easy to be safe in Warsaw, more or less safe, and like to text like go and kill the police or something like this. I'm not saying someone should do it, of course not. But when you're inside of this, the reaction like I have and a lot of people I've talked to, they have the same similar reaction, that they read, and also like they read other channels. Like most of the people don't read exclusively Nectar. So it's more like you talk to the people, you take part in the protests, and then it's more like a sort of I would say that that's the propaganda tool for those who are not directly involved, but those who are not directly, because they receive information only from Nectar, for example. But those who are actually active, they have a lot of sources of information, so it's some sort of a mix, and it's balanced. And yeah, of course, at some points, Nectar is quite radical. I think they balance their attitude now a bit, but what's happening next, I don't know, because I think there is an ambition from their leader to be sort of like the leader of the revolution, not just like a news channel, but more like to be one of the leaders.
Yeah, that's a high thing for a 22-year-old guy.
That's ages. I think he's learning as it goes as well, and I don't know. In that interview, he didn't quite say if he was expecting to become the channel to become so big so soon, because it just exploded.
Well, no one ever like could suggest that the Telegram channel would have more than 10 million readers, because it's like a very unrealistic number.
Yeah, it went viral the first days. It went viral. And he had to learn as it goes. Otherwise, nobody had prior experience of leading in a way so many people in real time, because it was all happening for you in real time, and it was the only connection to the outside. I remember as I was talking to you, you were saying that this is the only connection, that how you find out what's happening.
And not only happening, we had this internet blockage, and they texted on Telegram, because Telegram was working through VPN, and I was like texting my friend who is not based in Belarus that she would Google a recipe of some sort of dessert and send me as a text to Telegram, because I couldn't Google anything, and that was for several days. It wasn't only about like not reading the news about the protest. It was like not being able to work or to do something. Yeah, but I think what's, also like when we were talking about this, I understand that I perceive Nectar more like to see everything what happened, like more or less important, because it's like basically crowd-sourced media that people are sending it, and there is also a team which selects it, and then they had these propaganda posts, like not like news, but more like what should we do or something. But also, like, what's good about Belarusian Telegram channels, that it's not only Nectar, but also they have like sort of committee from all the main Telegram channels, and they talk like what sort of if they're saying like what should we do this week, like take money from the banks or something, like how to like basically help destroying the system even if you're not going on the streets. And they're like putting the same thing. So there is no war at this moment inside of this, let's say, opposition media. I think it's going to start after we win, and then it's going to be another much more complicated thing, when we're not going to think in this basically binary opposition of like the evil and the good, Lukashenko against the people, and like this. That's very easy to analyze, and that's very because if we're talking about the uniqueness of this revolution, it's unique in a sense that it's very easy to say what is good, what is bad in this thing. It's not about like all politics are tricky. This level of politics is not tricky. It's not about even like economical things or political things. It's about like killing people for going out on the street is a bad thing. Like it's there is no question mark in the thing, and that's basically what the protest is about at this point of time. But of course, it's going to
competition between them afterwards. There will be,
of course, yeah.
I would have a question. If you have if the presented works can be considered political artworks, and then the question is follow question is like how to define political art. From our regional perspective, not universal, but if we link it to some specific processes happening locally, like right now what's going on in Belarus, or political art goes somehow beyond these circumstances, which sometimes provoke specific reactions. Is it like a form of reaction, or is it something that also has its own, I don't know, content, which political art as a form of art produces?
Well, I think to answer this question, we have to start to define what is political and what is not. And my personal take that, like even like what's happening on quite personal and private levels, it's also connected to the political processes. And then if you're talking about anything more or less social, then which involves a lot of people and their reactions, especially if it's critical, then I would say that it's like we're dealing with political art, because for me the sphere of politics starts like very soon after my body ends, basically. And so I would consider the things like being part of the political art scene, let's say so, but also like all the like presented images. I would say that it's more about not like we have one image and it's iconic and we talk about this, but it's more about the process which is happening. I mean, like it's not one picture of a person in balaclava or this Aftazak or whatever. It's like hundreds of them or dozens of them, and their artistic field is more like the value of it is in this diversity and in the amount of artistic works created. So I think therefore, like when we're talking about like creating political art, it's basically the process of creating art is not drawing this image, for example, but it's more of contributed to this stream of like non-ending artistic contributions. And in this case, I would consider that the more important it's just to make your voice audible or visible in this case by contributing to the like much broader process. And I would say that the main artistic expression is all these artworks considered as one big artistic expressions to which a lot of people contribute. Basically, like the essence of the realists of the street. Basically, it's not about just like one person going out from house. It's like it becomes political and like political expression only when we are talking about like hundreds of people who went out on purpose. And I would say that with these artistic reactions I've been shown today, it's mostly about their value is that there are a lot of pictures like this.
And is it the same art that was created before
No.
the revolution?
I would say that's not the same, and perhaps like I was trying to show that it's possibly different when we talked about I mean like in this presentation, the first part I was showing like the examples of politically charged art before the revolution, and I would say that it's quite obvious that it's not the same. Firstly, I would say that the art which was created before it was much more, I would say, sometimes sophisticated and much more well thought. And at some point, and it's not like a good thing or bad things that now it's more like reactive responses. It's more about that back then they had to, firstly, when they were doing this artistic expression, they had much more time to think about the situation. Now everything is changing very fast, and when you're creating something, you have to do it like from today to tomorrow. Otherwise, it's not going to be up to date, and it wouldn't touch the people's hearts. And I think we are going to have much more critical, much more complex, and more sophisticated artworks or art projects created after everything comes to the end. It's like looking back, reconciling with the past, like thinking like what is good, what is bad, like in a much more complex and critical ways. Because now we're talking more about like array of like small things. But the other thing is about the fear, because before, like these people wouldn't publish these pictures criticizing the system, showing Lukashenko is some sort of an animal and putting their name next to this illustration, for example. I mean, it's more like a cartoon at some point, but the most important thing is about like taking the responsibility for artistic expressions in Belarus, and the protest like opened up this taboo which existed basically because people were afraid to be persecuted. And now it's more like, anyway, we're persecuted, so let's do art.
So for instance, art is now like 2 or 5 in the tool for fighting this political sphere, and, but not like political content for art. I mean, first, it's you need all this art like utilitarian for some street action. And it's not about quality of art, but more about say recognition.
Yeah, I would say that, of course, what we've been talking about, I mean, the second part of the presentation, it's more about this instrumental protest art. So it's about motivating and involving people, making people visible and audible. And if you're talking about like truly critical art or political art, I think it would start like in a year, for example, when it's going to be much more complex. And I think it's also not possible being in Belarus to create something truly critical and well thought, as basically people are living under huge stress. And it's not about like thinking on the broader picture. And so like what's happening is more like fighting back all the times, and also fighting back with images, or thinking like what sort of a performance we can do, which would be both like serving our political agenda, like what we want to reach with the protest, but also having some sort of, like this emotional discharge to see this, to create this. So at this point, it's pretty much instrumental and reactive.
You can say that it's also propaganda of this side. I mean, and not it's black or wood, but it's just like gun.
Yeah.
You shoot. And this and fire is this. But for me, it's look like in any revolutions, maybe it's more works this any type of propaganda that even virus or something. What we have, I mean, artists, and but. How I think is not make pictures simplified. You start like not make complex pictures, but you very. I mean, I see this, for example, pictures with Lukashenko and some dealer or Lukashenko. It's already understanding that Lukashenko is a bad person. Everybody knows that we should liquidate Lukashenko, blah, 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 all this understanding, and but we should repeat all these messages. For what? For people again see this, maybe it's visible, but it's visible already. I mean, it's, I don't understand what the message of this just show that we exist like against Lukashenko, or
well, we have to keep in mind that maybe for those who sit in this room, and maybe even for those who watch the stream, that's very obvious that Lukashenko is a bad guy and always been until 1991. It has been visible and obvious for people, but that's not exactly the truth. And when we're talking about this plethora of all these artistic expressions, some of these images are created by people who actually supported the government, for example. And now they're basically in the process of fighting their cognitive dissonance, because they're only now at some point they started to understand that perhaps everything is much more complicated. And at this point of time, they have this first reaction of trying to make peace and reconcile with what they believed before and what they're seeing now, and how their universe of stable and peaceful Belarus with the Batka and the father on the head of it, it's basically falling apart. And perhaps, and I would say yes, of course, a lot of these images are quite naive and like basically reproduce the same idea, but that's what like people would like to talk about right now, just like to reassure each other and themselves, as I told, like that we are doing the right thing, because of the most of the people it wasn't obvious till this August or this June.
Yeah, but it's not only about Belarus, it's also about our, for example, position of everywhere print a dot and say that it's stupid, but it's achievement. It's of course why need to repeat it again and again and again? It's
well, people like repetitions. That's why people watch all these TV series and everything. They just want the same plot, the same tropes.
You feel like artists, for example, start using this level of TV serials or make for the past the same propaganda like they make for the Putin, we make for the anti-Putin, and it's so on. I mean, when we're not different, we're just saying and we're just using different decorations, but totally same language, it's same type of thinking, like, see, this better. No, this way. I mean, I don't see like we have same models of fighting, speaking, and just some different maybe this content inside and different names like this good, this bad. But it's totally for me sometimes it looks like suits sense same, and it's also for me question about me, not only about.
I see.
Maybe it's a question about the role the artist should have in conjunction to situations like this, like not just to side with one side or with another, but to really produce a space of reflection.
Well, but also
in
like
this kind of
I think it's not possible to talk
avalanche
that.
of information. Like, where is our 30 seconds of reflection on what's going on actually around us?
Yeah, but then I would say that it's not possible to imagine the world in which like the artist is this like pure and very sophisticated producer of the not even the meaning but also of the space where the meaning can be born. We're gonna have like maybe it's like if we are talking like in this course the big one we have in this about like center and peripheries. It's also about the center and periphery of art. Maybe like in the very core of it, it should be that a bit absent presence. I would say that we are considering a lot of positions and a lot of ideas, but on the margins, on the periphery, we're going to have like a lot of repetitive and perhaps naive discussions and expressions. But this works only all together. I mean, like, you're gonna have to have some stupid idea so the artist would fight it, or perhaps some artists would fight it and some would admit like the balance between like good and bad or something. So I would consider the art scene not like, we can't say like, oh, that's not art, that's illustration, because it's also like part of the big process. And I see the like art field or art itself as like some sort of metaphysical entity, as connections between all these different forms. And also like a lot of people are doing art not knowing that they're